of these ideas about what these claims were being made about impacts to white sharks. Are there really impacts from commercial fishing? Who are the main ones having impacts, and how has that changed over time? So to do that, my students and I combed through fishing records going back almost 100 years. And we found a variety of records, even looking at fishing logs, scientific collections. Monterey Bay Aquarium has been involved in a research program now for almost 10 years. And from that, we found 369 records of white sharks being caught or reported caught in fisheries, different types of fisheries, commercial, recreational fisheries. And in some of those records, there was information about how big some of these sharks were. Not surprisingly, the most common size shark caught in any fishery were what we call babies. We call them young of the year, so they're less than 1 year old. So a baby white shark is less than 6 feet long. Juvenile white shark is between 6 and about 12 feet long, and then anything over 12 feet long we consider a subadult to an adult. So as you can see, most of the sharks being caught in any fishery are these babies. And that makes sense because most fishing gear can't really hold these bigger sharks. Now, in some cases, we had evidence of what fishery was interacting. And when we saw this information, this was actually really enlightening. Because it turns out that over 85% of the records of all the different fisheries we found, entangle nets were the ones where white sharks were found the most. And most of the times, these were these young of the year, these baby white sharks. Most of the other commercial fisheries had very minimal interactions, but not surprisingly, recreational fishing is the second highest reported occurrence. Most of these, believe it or not, are caught along our coastline, particularly off our ocean piers. So when we look at the locations of where different sizes were caught from these fishing records, this is for all sharks by size class, these blocks that you see are called Department of Fish and Game fishing blocks. So when a commercial fisherman has to report where they fish, they don't have to give up their secret spot. They just have to say what block they were fishing in. So these blocks are 10 miles by 10 miles. Now the darker colors indicate where more sharks were caught. So as you can see, most adult white sharks found in records from 1936 to 2009 were primarily found off Anacapa, Catalina, and off Palos Verdes, but very few records. When we look at juveniles, we see a different pattern. We see more juveniles are caught in some of our coastal blocks. Now see this gray line right here, this one right here? That's the state demarcation point. So anything inside 3 nautical miles is state waters. Anything outside that is federal waters. So we find the young of the year, however, are being caught most commonly, particularly in these coastal blocks. But it's really a hotspot off Ventura. There's a hotspot in Santa Monica. There's another hotspot off Huntington Beach, Dana Point, in San Diego. So based on fishing records alone, we're able to get an idea of where different size classes of white sharks have been over about a 100-year record. Now, remember I told you the #1 fishery that had the greatest interaction with white sharks was gill netting. So remember in 1994, because of declining catch of target species, which included white sea bass and California halibut, plus high bycatch of birds and marine mammals, the state of California voted to ban the use of gill nets in state waters, which means gill netters would literally set from the beach out offshore. After 1994, it was illegal to set a gill net inside state waters. It's still legal to set them outside of state waters, but there aren't very many places where these gill netters can still find shallow enough water offshore where they can still set gill nets. So these lines that you see right here indicate the number of gill nets set in 2 different fisheries, an offshore drift gill net fishery, which is targeting swordfish and sharks, and a nearshore drift set and drift gill net fishery targeting halibut, angel sharks, and white sea bass. So the interesting thing is when we look at the records, 1985 was the peak in this fishery. And in 1985, there were over 1,200 gill net permits in the state of California. There were 1,200 boats fishing gill nets. That fishery exploded in California. So we see a rapid increase in effort. We see the reported catch of white sharks go up. And then the fishery starts to decline, in some cases because it's being regulated. In other cases, they're seeing depletion of target species, and therefore they're not catching as much. In 1994, the state of California passes the nearshore gill net ban, so it's illegal to set gill nets in nearshore waters. Most of the gill netters went out of business. And in addition, in 1994, we passed legislation to protect white sharks in California. Now, prior to 1994, if a gill netter caught a white shark in their nets, they would land it. They caught it, they cut it up, took it to a fish market, they sold it in fish markets, and they sold it as shark. So if you ate shark what you thought was mako or thresher, between 1980 and 1994, there's a good chance you ate white shark and you didn't even know it. So prior to 1994, white sharks were harvested in California. After 1994, if a fisherman caught a white shark in their nets, they were legally required to shake them out, to let them go. So what we've seen since 1994 is that gill net fishing effort has been pretty stable. Now, of the offshore gill net fleet, there's only 12 boats left. Of the inshore gill net fleet, there are 40 permits, or 140 permits, but only about 40 boats active. So that fishery is pretty much gone extinct. And remember, they can no longer fish inside state waters. But this is the part that I want to point out to you. So with an 82% reduction in gill net effort, we've seen more and more of these baby white sharks being reported caught in the remaining gill net fishery. So by working with commercial fishermen, they would tell us when they caught sharks, and then we could go down and assess those sharks. But what we've seen since about 2002 is a steady increase in the number of sharks. So we believe that this is probably our best evidence for an increase in the population. So it's likely that gill netting had a negative impact on white sharks, but it can't be fishing alone that had that impact. But nevertheless, banning gill net is probably one of the key reasons why this population has shown signs of recovery.